Welcome to the Lemons and Pineapples podcast, the personal development podcast for folks who want more fulfillment, connection, purpose, and joy in life. I'm your host, Emma O'Brien, a no-nonsense coach, a seasoned entrepreneur, photographer, rescue dog mum, and happy life enthusiast. Each week on the podcast, I share tools, tips, and strategies, amazing guest interviews, and uplifting conversations that will help you improve all areas of your life. Let's dive in. Hi folks, a very warm welcome to season 3, episode 10 of the Lemons and Pineapples podcast. Today I have my very special guest Sam Shrosbree back, and we are going to be talking about how an understanding of polyvagal theory can help you better regulate your emotions and stress. First, a bit about Sam. Sam is a functional medicine health coach, a physiotherapist, and a therapeutic Pilates and yoga instructor. She's a firm believer that we all have the ability to optimize our health and vitality, and is passionate about guiding people towards living their happiest and healthiest lives. An entrepreneur and explorer, she's committed to finding and sharing the art of balanced, joyful living. Welcome to the podcast again, Sam.
Thank you. So good to be here.
We're talking about polyvagal theory today. So for anybody listening who hasn't got a clue what that is, because I think it's one of these things that's got a really complicated title, like we need a PhD to to understand it. So can you share in a nutshell what polyvagal theory is?
So I think that I think most people have an inkling of the fact that we have these different states of our nervous system, that we can either be in a calm, relaxed, rest and digest mode, or in our more stressed, fight and flight, fawn and freeze, anxiety-driven state. And polyvagal theory, I think, just elaborates on that concept. For me, the biggest thing is we often compare ourselves to being more animalistic, in that animals will either be scared and running away from becoming prey or running to catch food, and then they calm the rest of the time. Whereas humans are a lot more nuanced, and there's a lot more layers to the way in which our nervous systems react. We have these much higher functioning centers in our brain that sort of remember traumas and try and predict the future, and can become anxious. And that's where polyvagal theory comes on. It almost sort of adds in more layers to how our nervous systems may be firing, which often determines the way in which we perceive life and the world around us. And I think it's also a very big link between, it's kind of the best explanation of mind-body connection. A lot of sort of the ailments and mental and physical conditions that people get based on the state of their nervous system.
Amazing. And I think, am I right in thinking that essentially polyvagal theory is referring to the vagus nerve, which is that the main nerve that runs from our brains down into our bodies, and it branches out heart area and then stomach area? Is that right with my limited physiology knowledge?
So if we look at things again, the sort of simplistic just animal state, we have these two nervous systems, either the parasympathetic, which is your rest and digest, or the sympathetic, which is your fight and flight. And the parasympathetic nervous system, of which all the nerves sit in our brain, has this one very special nerve called the vagus nerve. Vagus is Latin for wandering, and that's because it's the only nerve to leave the brain and travel through the body. It goes through the eyeballs, the ears, the throat, the heart, the lungs, the diaphragm, and into the gut. And depending on how the vagus nerve, the tone, they call it, of the vagus nerve. So if your vagus nerve is on, it's often referred to as the vagal brake, that can make all those systems calm down. But if the vagus nerve is kind of flopping around, that's often when it's not able to fire. And that can determine the state of our nervous system. Polyvagal theory, it actually looks at which parts of the vagus nerve are active. So they speak about when your vagus nerve is in a kind of highest level is when it's active mostly around the brain area. And that is when we can have higher thought processes, more clarity, more creativity. And I think a big part of our higher functioning of being highly evolved mammals is that's our center of sort of connection and relationships and things like that. Whereas if your vagal nerve is in its lower state, which is where it's in the gut, that's where we are just in those very primal fight and flight, freeze, gut feelings.
Yeah, it's interesting. So my knowledge of it comes from kind of twofold. So obviously I'm a heart math practitioner. So
Mm.
heart math doesn't in any of the trainings, I don't think it refers specifically to the vagus nerve, but when I did a little bit of research and I read Deb Dana's book Anchored, she talks about the vagus nerve, and it kind of made a bit more sense about what we're doing with heart math, which is calming breathing down to slow that sympathetic nervous system when it's activated, and to concentrate on really generating more positive feelings, which of course then take us into that higher creative state. So it's quite interesting. The two kind of overlap.
Mm.
I think lots of the theories that are out there are all overlapping, aren't they? Just, people are calling them by different names. My
Absolutely.
my understanding from Deb Dana's book is that we have a ventral vagal, which is rest and digest. Am I correct with that? And then
Mm-hmm.
dorsal vagal, which is the fight or flight bit. And what we're doing with heart math specifically when we're calming breathing down is activating that vagal brake. So it starts to slow down all of the kind of dysregulation that happens within our system when we are stressed. But I think the one thing, the understanding I got from reading that book was when we're in that ventral vagal state too much, and correct me if I'm completely wrong here, that is when people end up in a freeze state and end up depressed. Is my understanding correct of that?
I think it's the other way around. I think the dorsal
Yeah.
vagal is that more freeze, locked,
Yes.
jammy state, and the ventral is our more evolved, higher level of safety, connection, interacting, enjoying being around each other,
Yeah.
socializing, things like that. So yeah, that is the more evolved, higher state, whereas the dorsal is the shutdown state. I think that one
Yeah.
of the nicest differences I heard is that when you're in ventral vagal, you're in a state of safety and connection, and when you're in dorsal vagal, you're in a space of fear and survival. Um, yeah.
Yeah, and I think again this is just so interesting to have this conversation to have a better understanding of it. Obviously, the vagal brake is all about calming our fight or flight system and getting us back into effectively into homeostasis.
Yes.
But we can obviously end up kind of getting that vagal brake into a state of almost the handbrake coming up by going too far into dorsal vagal with
Mm.
depression. And I think people who end up
Hmm.
stuck in freeze mode and are literally immobilized, unable to take action. How do we how do we find the balance with the polyvagal theory with that vagal brake? What are some strategies to be able to really kind of work with it and get the best out of it?
So I think life is going to be stressful. Stress is a natural part of life, and I think it's being able to have that resilience between the different states, because you don't want to just be cruising through life all the time either. We need a little bit of stress, we need a little bit of adrenaline, we need a little bit of vuma. So it's being able to just be more resilient, more elastic, more bouncy between those different states. And the best way to do this is to your body needs to know the difference between what is adrenaline and what is survival and what is getting things done and what is feelings of safety and calm. And yeah, I think we need to almost microdose feelings of safety and calm, that your body remembers what that feeling's like. So even when you've had a stressful period, when you've got to get things done at work, or got to get through, or even just an emergency situation, that your body knows this is just temporary, and I know what safety feels like, and it can bounce back into that state of safety. And that, yeah, that could be practices like every day doing things that bring your nervous system into a state of calm, that it knows that feeling, which could be, yeah, your heart math, your breath work, your yoga, meditating, time in nature. I see there's quite a lot of research now around sort of those homely feelings of safety. So it's being around people that make you feel safe and connected. There's a lot now around smells, and like the feeling of maybe like home cooked food that maybe your mother or your grandmother would have made. There's a lot around essential oils, which I think would have played into our primal brains, of sort of certain smells that would have been around us in nature that make us know that we are safe. So it's just always finding ways to know how that feels, that your body can bounce between those different states.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, isn't it? It is impossible to live a life of calm all the time, because I think it's very, very tempting. There's been lots of conversations in my house about moving to a small holding with no neighbors and no nothing. And to me, it's almost like an escape. And I think one has to be mindful that you're also disassociating, and it's sort of also a coping mechanism by like, oh, I have to get out of the day-to-day life. It's learning to manage things day to day, moment to moment. And like you said, learning to
Yeah.
build that resilience in your nervous system. And I think there's ways of doing this. I love what you touched on about giving yourself microdoses of safety. So I think that requires a little bit of observation of yourself and your own behaviors over the course of a day, and noticing if something, like you said, if there's a smell that sets you into, oh, this feels good, is to almost remember to anchor yourself into that state, so you can either kind of reflect back and remember that and bring yourself into that state when you're stressed, or actively go out and kind of find, like for instance, I think the one thing that comes to mind for me is I love a really scented rose garden. I mean, don't have one, got a couple of roses that cling on in the garden. But even if it means going
Mm-hmm.
outside and finding a flower and just enjoying the scent of the flower for a moment, just to bring you back into the present and bring you back into that feeling of feeling good. And I think when you're in that moment, it's to tap into what's happening somatically for you. So where do you feel good? Where do you feel a release? What is that
Absolutely.
feeling like? Because when we can really register it, we can remember it. And I think that's that, it's a lot of the theory of heart math, is being able to on demand bring yourself back into a more favorable state. And the more you train yourself to be able to come back from fight or flight, the slower your body is to go into fight or flight in a moment of stress. It's kind of a training. And I think that takes daily practice. And I think that's why it's so hard for a lot of people.
Yeah. I think the other thing is we don't acknowledge how much almost control we have to regulate our nervous system. We think everything is just happening on autopilot. I've heard a lot of descriptions saying that when you're in ventral vagal, it's like being on a cruise ship. When you're in sympathetic nervous system, it's like a sports car. So that would be like getting shit done in a day. But when you go into that dorsal vagal, it's like the ambulance is coming. And it's almost like we just letting this whole chaos of ships and sports cars and ambulances just run wild and do what they want to do. And I think the idea is to think of yourself as the air traffic controller, or the policeman, and you can decide, actually, okay, right, I need the sports car here because this is what's going to get me through my day. But when that day is done, how am I going to bring the cruise ship back in? What are the techniques that I can use? And I have the control to be able to decide what are the techniques and tools I can use to change the state of my nervous system. and one of the best descriptions I heard is we're very familiar with triggers. We know what triggers us. We know what makes us stress. We know what pisses us off, but we're less familiar with the glimmers or the things that then can be the opposite to that. And yeah, I heard something that said we need to be able to, like we said, microdose on those glimmers, so eventually the glimmers become glows, and you can easily connect back into that and just kind of cool things down after the chaos.
Yeah, I love that. And I think look, we're biologically programmed with a negativity bias. I mean, it is
Mm-hmm.
actually such a bore. I think it's why life is often so stressful and chaotic is we are trained to look for what don't I like about this? What went wrong here? And we're
Mm.
not really familiar with going, all right, I didn't quite go according to plan, but what were the great things about it? And
Yeah.
how can I find a moment of gratitude or a moment of contentment right where I am now? Even we're always moving forwards, aren't we? I mean,
Yeah.
we all do it, but I think, you set a goal and you end up sitting with like, okay, I'll be happy when I get to the goal.
Yes.
But I think the trick is to sit and go, how can I be happy right now? Because I think we
Yeah.
add to our own stress more and more and more by sitting and going, God, I can't stand being where I am right now, but I'll be better when I'm over here.
Mm.
And then we allow the right now to be really stressful. So I think what I take from this conversation is it's about finding contentment now, whatever that looks like. And like you said, it's going to be little moments. We can't create, unfortunately, even if even if we move to the small holding with nobody else there, you're still going to have challenges that come up. You can't get rid of
Absolutely.
them in life. It's really disappointing, but you can't get rid of them. There's always going to be something. Even if you created your most perfect utopian life, there's always going to be something that pops up that is a challenge or an obstacle or is a potential stressor. And I think it's about switching the
Mm.
response to it. And that to bring us back to our polyvagal theory, it's about working with your nervous system and understanding that you have actually got a hell of a lot more control over it than you think you
Mm-hmm.
do. So we talked about finding these little microdoses of contentment, little glimmers throughout the course of the day. We've touched on as well the heart math, which essentially one of the biggest parts of that is just slowing your breathing down
Mm-hmm.
to
Mm-hmm.
signal to your body that actually we can be calm. When we're stressed out, we tend to be breathing quite rapidly up in the top of our chest area. We're not getting a full lungful of
Absolutely.
oxygen. It sends everything into a bit of a panic. So slowing breathing down, heart focused breathing is one of the easiest techniques. For anybody listening, you can just go to YouTube and Google that. There's a video
Mm.
there. And it's literally breathing in for 5 and out for 5 slowly, whilst placing your focus on your heart area and doing it for a couple of minutes. That will calm your
Mm.
system down and just takes all of the crazy amygdala alarm system, just brings it, won't always take it offline, but it'll just bring it down a couple of notches so you can actually access some logical thought, which is always
Absolutely.
useful. Um, what are some other things that people listening, you and I, me, can do to really access that vagus nerve, start to tap into that vagal brake, and start to um, create vagal tone? I hope I'm using that in the correct
Yes.
context with that.
Um, so yeah, it's just something that you said earlier. They say your state determines your story. The story follows the state. So the state of your nervous system will determine your experience of life. So if you are in that sort of survival state, everything's going to look shit. Everything's going to look harmful. Whereas when you can be in that more ventral vagal state, so if you're in a dorsal vagal state, a social interaction may just feel like hell. Like everybody's judging you, it's making you feel anxious. Whereas when you're in a dorsal state, you'll be like, this is great. It's time to connect. I can be around people. I can enjoy their company. So the way change your nervous system can totally determine how a day looks. And yeah, I think the breathing is huge. If we look at it from a completely physiological point of view, the main three things that happen when you're in fight and flight compared to rest and digest is your heart rate increases, your blood pressure increases, and your respiratory rate increases. We can't actively control our blood pressure and our heart rate, but we have active control over our respiratory rate. So just slowing your breathing down, if you were running from a saber-toothed tiger, your heart rate, your respiratory rate, everything would be fast paced. But if you start slowing your breathing down, your brain starts going, okay, well, I'm clearly not running. If I'm breathing this slowly, I'm not running, and everything else will kind of follow suit. So I think the breathing is so powerful and it is so accessible. You could do it for 5 minutes in your car before you go into a meeting. I've been reading a lot around the links between anxiety and eating, that we should be doing sort of breathing before having a meal if you're going to go into a stressful situation. So I think that's definitely a powerful, powerful one. And yeah, ironically, part of being in that very highly evolved mammalian state of the ventral vagal state is connection. And it's often the last thing you want to do when you're stressed and anxious and you actually don't want to go to work, you don't want to be around your colleagues, maybe you don't want to be around your family or your partner or your friends, but that co-regulation is often very powerful. A lot of the research as well says when people are so in that dorsal vagal state, you actually battle to connect with other people, and they advocate a lot for your life. This one being around your pets and your animals, just sort of hugging or stroking a pet, and how soothing that is for the nervous system. Yeah, or being around people that make you feel safe and calm. Really prioritize, like a friend that maybe can give you a hug, or maybe yeah, it just makes you feel good. Time in nature is also a very, very powerful one, away from the frenetic chaos of industry and city life and things like that. It doesn't mean we maybe always need to be in nature, but having those pockets where you just kind of listen to the birds and watch the trees and smell the air and watch the clouds and things like that. The smells is a huge one. So cooking a delicious meal, smelling the smells, or going into your rose garden. There's also a lot of sort of the self-love stuff. If you can't find someone to give you a hug, it's maybe a long bath and maybe lighting scented candles and a self-massage, and things like that. Anything that feels, I don't know if you've heard the word hugger.
No. Do
So
tell.
I think it's one of the Scandinavian countries, and maybe Danish. They've come up with this idea of hygge. It's anything that, it's almost like fireplaces and blankets and books and chocolates and kittens. It's that warm, cozy, convivial feeling. So it's whatever would give you that feeling, which may be different from person to person. But those things that make you feel the most safe and content, and happy. But yeah, I'd say breath work on a very physiological level is probably the most powerful and the most accessible wherever you are. Yeah.
I love all of that. And I think we forget as humans, we're social creatures. And I think
Mm-hmm.
often if you look at conditions like depression and to an extent, I think chronic anxiety, it often stems from a lack of meaningful connection, a lack of feeling of belonging. And I keep going back to it, and I think this, when people are depressed, it's when they most need to be scooped up
Mm-hmm.
and held physically, metaphorically, but it's the time when you are most likely to literally just push people away. And I think
Yeah.
one has to be able to kind of climb out of the hole enough to reach out, whether that's to a friend, whether that's to a mental health professional. I think, there are lots of
Mm-hmm.
people out there who can help you. So don't sit on your own. And I think in moments of great stress, it's always really useful to have connection as well. So whether that is you've got somebody you can phone, and even if you phone to vent, can I just vent for 10 minutes?
Mm-hmm.
This has just happened. And you will feel better afterwards. And I think it's finding your community of people, because in that kind of scenario, you
Yes.
need somebody who is just going to listen and go, oh my God, that other person is such an asshole. And just to be able to empathize with you long enough to get that out so you can kind of move forward. And I think that's, that's
Yeah.
part of it. And I think if we take it to a more positive aspect of just having people to with shared interests to connect with,
Yes.
whether you go for a walk with someone, whether you go and have a nice lunch somewhere with someone who shares interests with you, and just having that conversation. We don't need to be connected to someone else 24 hours a day. I think sometimes just like a
Yeah.
half-hour conversation, a nice hour-long lunch can be enough to fill that cup and make you feel good. Obviously, time in nature, big on that. This is where Emma's small holding life fantasy comes in. It's just being able to be out in nature all the time. But I think I find it so soothing. I've noticed if
Mm.
I go away somewhere for a few days and there's lots of trees, immediately I get out the car and I just feel my whole body
Hmm.
just go, oh, this is so nice. It's just so
Yeah.
soothing. So, but you don't have to go and move to the countryside. One day and I'm going to have all sorts of animals, and I'm just going to create loads of chaos in the countryside. But at least there'll be birds and trees. But I think it's just having little moments. If you consciously make 10 minutes to go sit outside and listen to the birds singing and listen to how many different birds you hear singing. Birds singing is very interesting. I need to research it more, but I read something that actually the sound of birds singing is a wonderful, very primordial safety indicator for us. That's really
Mm.
inarticulate with that. But because when birds feel safe, they sing. When they go quiet, it's
Absolutely.
because there's danger. So it's actually a very ancient way for us to go out and just tap into feeling safe. If you hear birds, you're all good, no
Absolutely.
predators.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And even if you can't find the birds, or if you're feeling very anxious, I don't know, when the birds have gone to sleep, just playing certain music, it's just the vibrations of music is also meant to be very soothing to our nervous systems.
Yeah, amazing. Just pick your music carefully. We don't need some sort of death row misery music, folks. That won't help you. So amazing, amazing. Sam, as always, this has been a wonderful, wonderful conversation. Thank you for joining me. For folks who are interested in finding more about working with you, I will just remind everybody before we wrap up that we did a couple of episodes back, we did a fantastic podcast episode talking about gut health and mental health, which I know that the health aspect of
Mm.
things is a big area of your expertise. So if you haven't listened to that, do go back and have a listen to that one because again, Sam shared loads of great information in there. If you want to connect with Sam and find out more about working with her health coaching, how can people get in touch with you?
They can even go to my website, zenroomwellness.co.za, or on Instagram, it is zenroom at the woods.
Amazing. I'll put both of those in the show notes. And then, as I said in the last episode, Sam's going to be a regular guest. So we'll have all sorts of great episodes like this coming up where we talk about more. I think this is just such a holistic set of topics that we're talking about because
Mm.
I think we're now having a big move into, oh wait, we have these meat suits that we're walking around in and actually they're actually they give us a lot of information and we can actually
Yes,
if we look after them better, we have a better experience of existing. So that's what our
absolutely.
podcast episodes are going to be about. Look after your suit, folks. Thank
Uh,
you again. We will
Thank you.
see you in the next one, folks.
Look forward to it.
Thank you very much for joining us, and we will see you same time next week. Bye for now. Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you've enjoyed it, please leave me a 5-star rating and a review, and make sure you share this episode with a friend who you know will also enjoy it. I'd love to connect with you on Instagram. Please drop me a DM and say hi at Emma O'Brien Coach. And for more information about coaching with me, please head to my website, which is emmaobrien.coach.com.